That night, after Daniel and Claire left, the house became painfully quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until even breathing feels too loud. I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes that nobody had really eaten from. The roast sat untouched in the refrigerator beside the lemon pie I had baked because Daniel used to love it as a boy. For a moment, I rested my hand against the counter and closed my eyes. I could still hear Harold's laugh in this room if I tried hard enough. 42 years of marriage leaves echoes in a house. Little things survive people. His reading glasses were still folded beside his favorite chair in the living room. His coffee mug still sat upside down on the drying rack because I had not been able to put it away yet. The hallway still carried the faint smell of cedar and old cologne from the coat he wore every winter. I wandered slowly through the rooms after cleaning up dinner, touching familiar surfaces like I was afraid they might disappear overnight. The framed family photos along the staircase suddenly felt different now. I stopped at one from Daniel's college graduation. Harold had his arm around our son, proud enough to burst, while I stood beside them smiling into the bright May sun. Back then, I believed sacrifices meant something. I believed love, given freely to your family, would eventually come back to you in another form. Respect, loyalty, kindness. I laughed quietly at myself for that thought. Upstairs, I opened the bedroom closet and stared at Harold's suits hanging in perfect order. Gray wool, navy blue, the brown tweed jacket he always wore to church in October. I pressed my fingers against the sleeve of one coat and suddenly remembered the last thing he whispered to me at the hospital. No matter what happens, this house is yours, Ellie. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. Spiritually, I never imagined those words would become something else entirely. Downstairs, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A message from Claire. We should probably start discussing timelines soon so everybody can plan accordingly. Timelines. As though my entire life could be packed into cardboard boxes and moved according to a convenient schedule. I stared at the message for a long time before placing the phone face down on the table. Then I walked to the front window and looked out at the dark Pennsylvania street where snow had started falling softly under the streetlights. For the first time since Harold died, grief was no longer the heaviest thing in my heart. Something colder had quietly taken its place. The next morning, I woke before sunrise out of habit. For 40 years, Harold had started every day at 5:30 sharp, even after retirement. I could almost hear the old floorboards creak beneath his heavy footsteps as he shuffled toward the kitchen to make coffee. But the house remained still, empty. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself and walked downstairs, pausing halfway when I noticed something unusual near the front hallway. 2 large storage boxes sat neatly against the wall beside the coat closet. They had not been there the night before. For a moment, I simply stared at them, confused and unsettled in a way I could not yet explain. Then I noticed the handwriting across the side of one box in black marker. Guest bedroom. My stomach tightened immediately. I moved closer and lifted the lid carefully. Inside were folded blankets, old picture frames, and several books from the upstairs reading room. My reading room. The room Harold built for me 15 years ago after I retired from teaching 3rd grade. I stood frozen beside the box while cold morning light spilled through the front windows. Claire had a key to the house. Of course she did. Harold insisted on it years ago in case of emergencies. Suddenly, small moments from the past several months began sliding into place inside my mind with terrifying clarity. Claire insisting they store extra furniture in the garage because their basement was too full. Daniel casually asking where certain financial documents were kept after Harold became ill. The strange afternoon 2 weeks ago when Claire measured the upstairs hallway while pretending to admire the wallpaper. At the time, I ignored all of it because grief makes you overlook things you normally would not. I slowly climbed the stairs and stopped outside the reading room. The door was open. My white armchair had been pushed against the wall. Several shelves were half empty. A yellow measuring tape rested on the windowsill beside paint samples in soft shades of beige and cream. Nursery colors. I gripped the doorway so tightly my fingers hurt. They had already started planning changes to my house before Harold was even buried. Downstairs, my phone rang suddenly, making me jump. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Morning, Mom," he said casually, like nothing had happened at dinner. Claire stopped by early to organize a few things upstairs. "Hope that is okay." "Organize?" Such a harmless word again. I looked around the half-emptied room while anger slowly settled deep inside my chest, calm and steady like winter ice forming across a lake. "No," I said quietly. There was a long silence on the other end of the line because I do not think my son had expected me to say that word to him. Daniel arrived that afternoon, just before 3, carrying the same uneasy expression he used to wear as a teenager whenever he knew he had disappointed me. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark wool coat as he stepped into the foyer, stamping his boots carefully against the mat Harold bought during our trip to Vermont 20 years ago. For a moment, seeing my son standing there in the familiar house almost softened me. "Almost. Mom," he said quietly, removing his gloves. Claire was only trying to help. I looked at him from the dining room doorway where I had been polishing silver candlesticks that nobody used anymore. "Help who?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough for the truth to settle heavily between us. He walked into the kitchen and loosened his tie, avoiding my eyes while opening the refrigerator like he still lived there. "Some habits survive adulthood. You cannot stay here alone forever," he said finally. "The house needs repairs. The taxes keep going up. Claire and I are just trying to think ahead." I watched him pour himself a glass of orange juice while memories crowded painfully into my mind. Daniel at 8 years old standing on a chair. Beside this same counter helping me frost Christmas cookies. Daniel at 16 begging Harold to teach him how to drive in the church parking lot. Daniel at 23 crying quietly at our kitchen table after his first serious heartbreak while I made him grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight because he had not eaten all day. Every version of my son still lived inside these walls. But the man standing in front of me now felt strangely unfamiliar. "Think ahead to what?" I asked softly. "My funeral?" His face tightened immediately. "That is not fair." "No," I replied calmly. "What is not fair is measuring rooms in my house before your father has even been gone a month." He rubbed both hands over his face in frustration, and suddenly he looked exhausted rather than angry. "Older somehow. Claire is pregnant," he admitted quietly. The words landed gently but changed everything inside the room. I stared at him for several seconds before lowering the silver candlestick onto the table. "Since when?" 10 weeks. 10 weeks. Harold had still been alive 10 weeks ago. Weak and struggling to breathe some days, but alive enough to ask every evening whether Daniel had called. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table because my knees suddenly felt unstable. Daniel finally looked directly at me then, and for the first time in weeks I saw something beyond guilt in his expression. Fear. "We need more space," he said carefully. "And Claire thinks it would be good for the baby to grow up here. Here, in my house, around my memories." Surrounded by the life they were already preparing to erase piece by piece while pretending it was all for my own good. After Daniel left, I remained at the kitchen table long after the daylight faded from the windows. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked steadily through the silence, each second sounding louder than usual inside the empty house. Pregnant. The word stayed in my mind like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples I could not stop. Part of me wanted to feel joy. I had always imagined becoming a grandmother would be one of the happiest chapters of my life. Harold used to joke that he would spoil our future grandkids so much they would never want to leave our house. I could still picture him standing in the garage workshop last summer building a small wooden rocking horse even before there was any baby to give it to. He said he simply wanted to be ready. My chest tightened at the memory. Slowly, I stood and walked toward the garage through the mudroom hallway. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and motor oil the way it always had. Harold's tools remained exactly where he left them. His red toolbox sat beneath the workbench beside neatly stacked pieces of unfinished oak. In the corner, covered by an old plaid blanket, was the rocking horse. I pulled the blanket back carefully and ran my fingers across the smooth carved wood. Harold spent weeks sanding every edge by hand because he said children deserved beautiful things made with patience. Tears burned behind my eyes then, sudden and sharp. Not because Claire was carrying a baby, but because Harold would never meet that child. And because the home he built with such care was already being discussed like a property listing instead of a family legacy. My phone buzzed again inside my cardigan pocket. This time it was not Daniel. It was my attorney, Margaret Ellis. I stared at her name on the screen for a moment before answering. Margaret had handled our wills and estate paperwork for years. Her voice sounded warm but cautious. "Eleanor, I wanted to check on you after the funeral. she said gently. "And there is another matter we should probably discuss sooner rather than later." Something in her tone made me straighten immediately. "What kind of matter?" There was a brief pause. "Your husband updated several documents 6 months ago. I think it would be best if you came into the office so we can review everything together." I glanced around the garage slowly. At Harold's workbench, at the rocking horse, at the old fishing poles hanging along the wall. 6 months ago was right around the time Daniel and Claire suddenly became unusually interested in helping Harold with bills and paperwork during his medical appointments. A cold feeling moved quietly through me then, the kind that arrives before a storm. Did my son know about these changes? I asked carefully. Margaret paused again before answering. "No," she said softly, "and I believe your husband intended to keep it that way." The following morning, I drove downtown through gray February rain with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. Pittsburgh looked colder than I remembered. The sidewalks glistened beneath weak morning light, while people hurried beneath umbrellas carrying paper coffee cups and briefcases. Life moved forward for everyone else as if nothing had changed. Margaret's office sat on the 4th floor of an old brick building near Market Square, the same office Harold and I had visited together every few years whenever taxes, insurance papers, or retirement documents needed updating. Walking through those familiar glass doors without him beside me felt wrong in a way I could not explain. Margaret greeted me quietly and led me into her office overlooking the city streets below. She did not waste time with small talk. Instead, she opened a thick folder and slid several papers carefully across the desk toward me. "Your husband became concerned last summer," she said gently. "Not about you. About pressure being placed on him while he was sick." I stared down at Harold's neat signature across the bottom of multiple documents. Trust papers, property records, amendments to the will. The words blurred slightly as my heartbeat quickened. "Pressure from who?" I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. Margaret removed her glasses slowly. "Your son and daughter-in-law requested several meetings regarding ownership transfer options while Harold was undergoing treatment." The room became completely silent except for the faint hum of traffic outside the windows. I remembered those months clearly now. Claire bringing folders to the house under the excuse of helping organize medical bills. Daniel suddenly asking detailed questions about property taxes and refinancing rates during dinner conversations. Harold growing quieter each week afterward. At the time, I assumed illness was simply exhausting him. "He refused every request," Margaret continued. "Eventually, he instructed me to place the house entirely into your name through a protected trust that cannot be altered without your direct consent." I looked up slowly. "Entirely?" She nodded once. "Including the land and all adjoining assets." For several seconds, I could not speak. Harold knew. Somehow, before he died, my husband had already seen exactly what was coming. Margaret slid one final envelope toward me then. "He also left you this. He asked that you read it only if you ever started doubting yourself." My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet written in Harold's careful handwriting. "Ellie, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. I know you will try to keep peace because that is who you are. But this home was built by your sacrifices as much as mine. Do not let anyone convince you that growing older means becoming less valuable." Tears filled my eyes so suddenly I had to look away toward the rain streaking the office windows. Harold had known me well enough to predict exactly what I would do. Endure quietly. Apologize for taking up space. Shrink myself to make others comfortable. But sitting there in Margaret's office with his letter trembling in my hands, something inside me finally stopped shrinking. When I returned home that afternoon, Claire's silver SUV was already parked in the driveway. I sat inside my car for a moment watching the windshield wipers push cold rain back and forth while a strange calm settled over me. A week ago, seeing her there unexpectedly would have filled me with anxiety. Now it simply made me tired. Through the front window, I could see movement inside the living room. Claire was rearranging furniture in my house while I was meeting with my attorney about protecting the very home she thought she was inheriting. I stepped inside quietly, hanging my coat beside Harold's old winter jacket like I always did. Claire glanced up immediately with a bright smile that vanished the second she saw my expression. "Oh good, you are home," she said cheerfully. "I was just trying to open up the room a little. It will need more space once the baby comes." I looked around slowly. Harold's leather recliner had been pushed near the wall. The antique side table my mother gave us as a wedding gift now sat awkwardly beside the staircase. Family photos had been removed from the fireplace mantel and stacked carelessly on the piano bench. "Put everything back?" I said calmly. Claire blinked twice as if she had misheard me. "Excuse me." "Every single thing," I repeated quietly. "Back where it belongs." The silence between us sharpened instantly. She folded her arms across her chest, and for the first time since marrying my son, her polished kindness slipped completely. "Eleanor, we are trying to prepare for the future here." "No," I replied softly. "You are preparing for my absence." Her jaw tightened. "Daniel told me you were upset earlier, but honestly, I think grief is clouding your judgment right now." Grief. Another harmless-sounding word people use when they want older women to question themselves. I walked past her slowly and picked up one of the framed photographs from the piano bench. It was a picture of Harold holding Daniel on his shoulders at Kennywood Park when Daniel was 5 years old, both of them smiling beneath bright summer sunlight. "Do you know what the problem is, Claire?" I asked quietly while dusting the frame with my sleeve. "You keep speaking about this house like it belongs to somebody waiting in line behind me." Her expression changed slightly then. Uncertainty flickered behind her eyes for the first time. Before she could answer, the front door opened and Daniel stepped inside carrying grocery bags. He froze almost immediately, sensing the tension in the room. Claire turned toward him quickly. "Your mother is being unreasonable again." Again, as though protecting my own home had become some emotional inconvenience for them to manage. Daniel looked exhausted as he set the bags on the kitchen counter. "Mom," he sighed carefully, "we all need to start acting like a family." I stared at my son for a long moment before answering. Families do not quietly erase people while they are still alive. That evening, after Claire finally left the room in frustration, Daniel stayed behind in the kitchen pretending to organize groceries that did not need organizing. I stood at the sink rinsing coffee cups while rain tapped softly against the windows over the backyard. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence between parent and child can feel very different from ordinary silence. Heavier, sadder, like standing in the ruins of something that used to be safe. "She is stressed," Daniel said eventually without looking at me. "The pregnancy has been difficult." I dried my hands carefully with a dish towel before turning around. "And what exactly have I done to make her life harder?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again because there was no honest answer to give. The kitchen lights cast tired shadows beneath his eyes. For the first time, I noticed how much gray had appeared near his temples over the last few years. Age arrives quietly on everyone eventually. "Mom," he said softly, "we are not trying to hurt you." I almost believed he meant it. Almost. But intentions matter less than actions once damage has already been done. I walked slowly toward the kitchen table and sat down beneath the old brass light fixture Harold installed himself back in 1998 after saving for months to remodel the room. "Do you remember your 10th birthday?" I asked suddenly. Daniel looked confused by the question. "What? Your birthday party at Three Rivers Stadium?" I continued quietly. "You wanted to invite every boy in your Little League team, even though we could barely afford it that year." A faint smile touched his face despite himself. "Dad sold his fishing equipment to pay for those tickets." "No," I corrected gently. "I sold my wedding jewelry from before I met your father. Harold never let you know because he did not want you carrying guilt over something that should have felt joyful." Daniel's expression slowly changed then. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because families survive through sacrifice," I answered. "Real sacrifice. Quiet sacrifice. Not calculation." His eyes dropped toward the floor immediately. Somewhere deep down, my son still understood the difference. I could see it all over his face. But understanding something and standing against your spouse are two very different things. Upstairs, I heard floorboards creak. Lightly where Claire moved around the reading room again. My reading room. Daniel heard it too. "She is only excited about the baby," he said weakly. I looked toward the ceiling for a moment before answering. "No, Daniel. Excitement does not make people measure curtains in someone else's bedroom before asking if they are welcome to stay." The room became painfully quiet after that. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, Daniel sat down across from me at the kitchen table where he once did homework every night while I packed his school lunches for the next morning. "What did Dad change before he died?" he asked quietly. There was at last. Not grief. Not concern for me. The real question that had been waiting beneath every conversation all along.